So we're back talking with Jerry Meral about the Stanislaus and the early 1970s campaigns. After the failure of Proposition 17, what was your next step, and how did you feel about the situation?
So this was November of '74, and Jerry Brown, of course, was running for governor and narrowly beat Houston Flournoy, famous family from Modoc County. He was the controller and Brown was the Secretary of State. So he defeated Flournoy, and fairly quickly on, because I had worked with him a lot during this whole effort, and he liked my briefing, I guess. So anyway, he asked me to be part of the administration. At the time, the California legislature had just created the California Energy Commission, and Ronald Reagan signed that bill even though he was asked not to, and so it was created, but Reagan didn't make any of the appointments because it didn't go into effect until Brown became governor. And so I was nominated by the Sierra Club for the environmentalist position on the California Energy Commission. And I thought, oh, that sounds good, you know. Well, I wanted to do it, obviously. However, Brown knew me as a water person and said, I want you to go work at DWR. And he named Ron Roby as the Director of Water Resources, who was an environmentalist, really, and experienced government person who worked at, he was on the vice chair of the State Water Board. So I became the deputy director, and you know, became quickly responsible for things like planning and energy and stuff like that, and had to become a state official or bureaucrat or whatever. So I couldn't really work on the continuing effort on the Stanislaus in an overt way. I could advise, you know, meet, things like that, but I couldn't, you know, represent the administration. And so others picked up, Mark and Jennifer and a whole bunch of other people, Alexander and a whole bunch
Within Friends of the River.
Yeah. Keep Friends of the River going. That was the idea. Keep it going and continue the effort to try to stop the New Melones Dam, which was barreling ahead with construction every day. Another thousands of dollars got spent up there. And so I was able to watch that, but I couldn't do much about it. I was in the state. However, I could, when Mark decided he wanted to spend some quality time on the river, I was able to work with Brown pretty directly.
This is when Mark changed himself to prevent the flooding of Parrott's Ferry.
Yeah. So I was able to work with Brown pretty directly on getting him to, you know, oppose any more filling while Mark was down in the canyon, and he was very overt. That's all on the website, I'm sure. So that was good. And I did work with Tim a little bit on his, he was starting his book. And
Tim Palmer.
Tim Palmer, to help him with that. So, but, you know, basically my main effort was in the Delta, a lot of it, dealing with the then peripheral canal, and the most, I would say, see, that was 78. We had three main Wild River efforts at the Department of Water Resources. One was to place the state rivers, which were passed by Peter Bear in 1972, into the federal system. And I and Ron Roby convinced Brown that he should do that as part of signing the peripheral canal legislation in Los Angeles on live state TV, which had almost never been done before. And he didn't tell the water people he was going to do it until the night he signed the bill. They had a huge heart attack, because they were all thinking they were going to get the EO and the Trinity and all that. And then there was a giant effort to get the environmental documentation done, led by Jonas Minton and Steve McCauley and Barbara McConnell, a number of other people, to get the environmental stuff done before Carter left office. Fortunately, all the stuff was done the last day of the Carter administration. The Secretary of Interior, Cecil Andrews, signed the papers necessary to put the wild rivers into the federal system. That was an enormous accomplishment. Probably one of the best environmental things the Brown administration
ever did. It cemented the rivers as wild and scenic.
Yes.
You couldn't just
and Congress did not have to approve. It was done by administrative action. That's what the law allows. The other two wild river efforts we got involved in were the Tuolumne, which under, you know, the Brown administration, we said we don't want any dams in the Tuolumne. And I was able, had a lot of free hand in that, and organized at my living room the organization of what became the Tuolumne River Trust, and hired John Amadeo. And so I was able to spend a lot of time on that. We had people like Sharon Negri in the administration doing publications about how the Tuolumne should be saved. Eventually, DWR became known as the Department of Wild Rivers. We also wanted to oppose the Auburn Dam, but Brown decided to run for president. And since Jimmy Carter was against the Auburn Dam, he was for it, for a while until he decided not to run anymore. He kind of didn't succeed in that. And then he said, who cares, go and oppose it. So we ended up opposing the Auburn Dam as well. So it was a great time for Wild Rivers for state policy.
Yeah, that's quite a thing. Any final recollections on the whole Stanislaus experience? You've talked about how the loss of Prop 17 in some ways was a boost for other kinds of organizing efforts in perverse kind of ways, but understandable. Any other kind of recollection, thinking, reflection now?
Well,
50 years
just,
from the day?
You know, in those days, there was something called the Dam Fighters Conference that was held every year in Washington, D.C., organized by Brent Blackwelder, and everybody would go back and compare notes about all the dams we were fighting around the country. Fortunately, there's no longer a need for that conference. We're tearing them down now instead of building new ones. But the Stanislaus effort was very inspiring nationally to a lot of people around the country. You're going to have a statewide vote in California on a dam, and that inspired a lot of people around the country as well as in California. And as you said, a lot of the people who did become active in that went on to careers in water, environmental quality, and things like that. So I think that was ultimately the best outcome, you know, in a way, from the whole Prop 17 fight. I do think that it's sort of sad in a way that so much effort went into trying to stop the dam after the voters refused to do it. Because once you've lost the voters and you...
This is the effort around Prop 13 and the other efforts that were made after...
Right. A lot of energy went into that. There's the Prop 13 effort in 1982 and so on. And I'm not saying that effort was wasted. It kept it before the public, the issue. But any outside observer could look at that and go, that isn't going to work. It's just not going to work. And I could never convince Mark Dubois, who was really the spark plug behind all of that, to divert some of that effort into other, maybe more productive activities like fighting Auburn Dam. I couldn't get Friends of the River to fight Auburn Dam, which now, of course, looking back, they're the ones that probably killed it in many ways. But for
they eventually did shift to doing that.
Yeah, when Ron Stork came on and wasn't all bound up in the Stanislaus.
Yeah.
So I think that sort of, the effort kind of tailed off in a way that wasn't maybe all that productive. Prop 13 was good in that it focused on groundwater and overdraft and so on, even though it ended up, losing by a pretty substantial margin. So there was a lot of tail to the effort, basically.